Hello, everyone. Good evening to each and every one of you. On behalf of Goa Rainbow Trust, I welcome you all to today's webinar, a conversation on misgendering and deadnaming with Farheen Sha. Before we move forward, just a reminder again to please mute yourselves for any new joinees. Please mute yourself so that we can avoid any disturbances. And also, this will be recorded. So if you are uncomfortable with your video being shared, you can switch off your video also. Thank you. So with regards to the topic, we have been seeing a lot of people putting up, uh, you know, their pronouns on their social media, and you must have heard a lot of LGBTQ people being offended in a way when anyone misgenders them, when anyone uses the wrong pronoun, or especially with regards to gender diverse individuals like trans individuals, non-binary individuals, gender non-conforming individuals, etc. Oftentimes, if they happen to use a different name, one which aligns with their gender identity, you often find that they feel offended, or they will correct you to use their correct name rather than the name they used before transitioning, or even if they have not transitioned and still choose to use a different name, then they expect you to respect that. So today we have with us Miss Farheen Shah, who will be talking about this entire topic and will help us understand what is the psychological impact of misgendering and deadnaming on LGBTQIA plus individuals. So Ms. Farheen Shah is an LGBTQIA plus affirmative wellness counselor, as well as a freelance content writer editor based in Goa. She has a certification from the American Counseling Association in LGBTQ counseling competencies, college and career readiness. Farheen is currently affiliated to the Goa Rainbow Trust in the capacity of a web content writer and editor. She uses her voice to spread awareness about and champion for LGBTQIA plus people and the unique issues faced by them. She has also conducted and been part of a number of psycho-educative workshops and training sessions regarding the same. On behalf of Goa Rainbow Trust, I welcome you, Farheen, today for this webinar, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And without further ado, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Thank you so much, Francis, for that introduction and for telling our participants who I am. So, so basically, as Francis already mentioned, I am an LGBTQI plus affirmative wellness counselor. And in case any of the participants or anybody that you know is thinking about getting themselves into therapy, I have also added my details in the chat box, which you can use to get in touch with me at a later time and date in case you would like. Okay. So now, as Francis said, we've all gathered here today to have a conversation on misgendering and deadnaming. But now it's a little hard to have a conversation about something that we are not entirely clear about. So for starters, let's let's look at what these terms mean and what misgendering and deadnaming is. So starting with misgendering, misgendering is basically a phenomenon that occurs when someone intentionally or unintentionally refers to, relates to, or uses language to describe a person that does not align with their affirmed gender. And before I continue, I just want to make a point in case any of y'all have any questions along the way. Y'all can maybe enter it into the chat box or make a note of it somewhere because we will be addressing all of those towards the end of the webinar, okay, once I'm done with all the talking points. All right. So, yes. So, yeah. So, misgendering basically occurs, as I said, when a lot of people think that it is only intentional, but not always. It is an intentional or unintentional reference to a person in a manner that does not align with their affirmed gender. Now, obviously, needless to say, misgendering is a phenomenon that occurs in the context of gender diverse people. So, transgender, non binary, or gender non conforming individuals. Moving on to dead naming. Dead naming is basically when someone intentionally or unintentionally refers to a transgender individual by the name that they used before their transition. Okay, like before they actually started affirming their identity through their name. Now, a lot of people who indulge in this practice of dead naming people, they will try to sugarcoat it by saying that, oh, I was just using this person's birth name, or, oh, I was just, it's his given name any which way. But basically, if you're using the name of a person that they have publicly said and made it a point that that is not the name to be used for them and you're still using it, you are essentially dead naming them, and that is not cool. Okay. Now, in the context of gender and dead naming and misgendering, especially, the other thing that pops up nowadays is the whole topic of pronouns. And I'm sure that a lot of you will be thinking about, like, what is this obsession with pronouns? And now there is something all the more new called neo pronouns. Like, what is all this? It's so confusing. So let's take a look at that as well. Now, grammatically speaking, pronouns are words that we use to refer to an individual when we are not using their names. In most languages, pronouns are gender specific. Okay, and because of this they tend to form a very essential part of the social aspect of gender transitioning. Basically, it is that aspect that helps individuals affirm their gender in a social setting. It helps individuals basically tell people that this is how I perceive myself and this is how I want you to perceive me too. Okay. Coming to neopronouns are gender neutral pronouns. Unlike pronouns, these are not gender specific. And the entire point of neopronouns is that it helps in promoting a more inclusive culture. Currently, the most common neopronouns that are being used are the ZE and XE variations of neopronouns, but obviously there are a lot more, and covering each of those and their pronunciations would probably take a lot more time. So maybe you all could brush through it over the internet if it's something that you want to educate yourself about. But I find it important to emphasize the fact that neopronouns are a relatively new strategy and approach that is being adopted in order to tackle the whole binary system of gender that exists. Now, as we have said, and as we all know, pronouns are an aspect of language and culture that is very deeply embedded. It is something that we learn as practically as toddlers. Okay, like the moment we start speaking. And for time immemorial, pronouns have been assigned on the basis of the anatomy, how one looks. Based on that, based on your physical characteristics, you get your pronouns assigned to you by people. And it basically sticks with you for a while. So, if somebody is going to the extent of actually making it a point to change their pronouns and take on that entire struggle and hassle of doing so, it usually it happens. The reason why someone would endure something of that sort is because there is some amount of gender dysphoria present. Okay. Now, what is gender dysphoria though? Now, gender dysphoria, as described by the DSM-5, DSM-5 basically is the diagnostic and statistical manual for mental disorders and illnesses that mental health professionals use And DSM-5 is the fifth edition, which is the most recent edition of this manual. Okay, now this is basically a manual that us mental health professionals use in order to categorize and identify illnesses, disorders, and psychological conditions within individuals based on the symptoms that they show. Okay, now the DSM 5 states that gender dysphoria, first of all, is not a disorder. It is not a disorder, it is a psychological condition, a psychological state of being. It's not an illness. If you've got gender dysphoria, it doesn't mean that you are sick or that you are in some way abnormal. Okay, by definition, gender dysphoria is an intense psychological distress that results from an incongruence or a mismatch between one's sex assigned at birth and their gender identity. Okay, now gender dysphoria basically manifests itself differently in adults and in younger individuals, so in children and adolescents. Um, in children. So we club adults and adolescents together, and we have children as a different category altogether. Now, a lot of people say that, like, like if someone acts, a little tomboyish, or if someone is effeminate, then there must be some gender dysphoria issues happening. But we need to be very careful before we throw this term around very casually. So in order for us to understand this a little bit better, I will just run through these symptoms that I just spoke about. Now, first of all, for anybody to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, whether it is an adult, an adolescent, or a child, they have to be experiencing uh, marked, like sharp incongruence between their sex assigned at birth and their gender identity for at least 6 months. So it's not something that comes for a week or a month and goes away. It has to last for some amount of time. Now, the symptoms usually present in an adolescent or an adult who is experiencing gender dysphoria are a marked incongruence between one's experienced gender and their primary and or secondary sex characteristics. The next symptom is a strong desire to get rid of one's primary and or secondary sex characteristics because of a marked incongruence with their experienced gender. A strong desire for the primary and or secondary sex characteristics of the other gender. A strong desire to be of the other gender. A strong desire to be treated as the other gender, and a strong conviction that one has the typical feelings and reactions of the other gender. So these are the symptoms when it comes to an adolescent or an adult. What about a child? Now things play up a little differently when it comes to gender in children. This is because of multiple factors, but one of the main factors is because of the cognitive abilities. Children understand gender differently compared to older individuals. So for them, the symptoms that we look for are a strong desire to be of the other gender or an insistence that one is of the other gender. Now, in this case, other gender is basically any gender that the individual aspires to be. Okay, whenever I say other gender, okay, it's not necessarily the opposite sex. Yeah, in boys who are assigned male at birth, a strong preference for cross dressing or simulating female attire, or in girls who are assigned female at birth, a strong preference for wearing only typical masculine clothing, and a strong resistance to the wearing of typical feminine clothing. Another symptom is a strong preference for cross gender roles in make believe play or fantasy play or pretend play. A strong preference for the toys, games, or activities stereotypically used or engaged in by the other gender. A strong preference for playmates of the other gender. In individuals assigned male at birth, a strong rejection of typically masculine toys, games, and activities, and a strong avoidance of rough and tumble play. In individuals assigned female at birth, a strong rejection of typically feminine toys, games, and activities. A strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy, and a strong desire for the physical sex characteristics that match one's experienced gender. Now, as I said, in order for somebody to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, they need to be experiencing these incongruences for at least 6 months. And from all these symptoms that I have just now read out to you, depending on whether it is a child or an adolescent or an adult that we are dealing with, at least two symptoms of these need to be present. So if your child just or if your child just wants to dress in a certain way, it does not necessarily mean that they are experiencing gender dysphoria. You need to be very careful and very attentive and alert about what you think and how you behave with kids before you just throw some term onto them or some condition onto them. And plus, along with these symptoms, they also need to be associated, these symptoms need to be associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in their social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Basically, what this means is that the mismatch, the incongruence, the distress is so bad that the individual finds it hard to cope in their even their normal daily life. Okay, so before, which is why it is not cool to just label people with oh, this person has some kind of dysphoria. We say this, people say this so loosely, and that is so wrong. So we need to take this upon ourselves to actually educate ourselves about these things. Now, as I said, and as I spoke to you about the kind of distress and discomfort that comes with experiencing gender dysphoria, okay, individuals that experience this struggle with their identities for years most of the time. So now imagine if someone has gone through all this struggle and they finally found a way to actually align their experienced gender with the gender that they want others to perceive them as, through maybe the use of pronouns or or a change of name, and then somebody gets it wrong. Can you imagine what that person must feel after having gone through all that struggle, to just have people shove you back into the same box, into the same category, into that same identity that you don't even fit in. So now misgendering and dead naming has some very serious psychological consequences on LGBTQ plus individuals. Okay? So let us first look at some of the very specific consequences of misgendering. Now, when an individual is misgendered, it has very negative consequences on the self confidence and overall mental health of trans people. Okay, so in general, their self confidence and mental health takes a hit. It also leads to the individual feeling highly stigmatized and prejudiced. If the individual is misgendered relatively frequently, then they sometimes tend to get stuck in a way on their only on the gender identity aspect of themselves. Now, what this point basically means is that yes, gender is a huge part of who we are as individuals. But are we just men, women, or somebody on the spectrum? No, not necessarily. We are, let's say, I'm just going to throw a name out here, okay? If it coincides with somebody or somebody that you know, that's completely unintentional. Okay? So let's take a name. Um, let's take a name Kate. Okay? Now, Kate is, okay, let's say Kate is a woman. But Kate is not just a woman. Kate is somebody's daughter. Kate is somebody's sister. Kate is, let's say, a banker. Kate is an Indian national, a Goan. Okay, she is an alumnus of whichever school. Kate is so many things. But the thing is that if you tend to misgender people constantly, then it's like their entire life revolves only around the gender aspect. And that can get very unhealthy for the person who is being misgendered. Another consequence is that being misgendered can cause an individual to experience a decline in their self-esteem around their appearance. Basically, what this means is that it drives the person into thinking, is there something wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? I mean, like if people are constantly perceiving me like this, maybe I'm not dressing the right way, or maybe I should talk in a certain way, or maybe my makeup is not fine, or it should not be there altogether, or I should put a lot more of it. What am I doing wrong that people are perceiving me this way? So they lose, the person who is misgender tends to lose confidence in their appearance, how they look. It's like I'm getting it wrong. I'm doing something wrong. Okay, so it's like as if they are the ones in fault and not the people who are misgendering them. It also causes them to have a reduced sense of strength and continuity in their identity. Basically, if you keep misgendering somebody, if they are constantly misgendered by various people at different points in time, they tend to lose their strength because, as we said, as I mentioned earlier, these things are rooted at a very deep level in our culture, in our society. In order to for somebody to actually push past through this and come up with a new identity, they need to struggle, they need to fight for it. So if you're going to constantly misgender them, it's like they lose their fight. They feel like, what is the point? I've been doing this for so long and nobody sees me for who I am, so might as well just let it go. And another very important issue is that you can end up outing the person if you misgender them. If this person has created a completely new life for themselves with new sets of friends and work people and whatever, and suddenly you come and call them out with this other gender that they used to be, you can risk outing them in this new life that they have built for themselves, and that can be physically dangerous because then you're putting them in a position where they can be victims of violence, abuse, discrimination, and so many other really scary things. Being misgendered also causes individuals to have feelings of anxiety and sadness, negative body image, and feel isolated from family and friends. Now, when it comes to dead naming, again, there are feelings of invalidation, like the person has not, they feel like no one sees them for who they are. Again, there is the risk of outing the person. It can cause highly increased levels of stress and depression. And misgendering and dead naming, individually and together, also can increase the rate of suicidality in gender diverse individuals. Okay, it makes them want to basically, I mean, if their basic identity is not being acknowledged, then they basically start questioning, like, why do I even want to live? What is the point? And that starts the entire cycle of suicidality, and it's never right to drive anybody to that point. Now, um another common concern when it comes to trans individuals is that of surgical transition or actual physical reassignment. Okay, and the looming question is it necessary for a person to have a sex reassignment in order to identify or qualify as trans? Now, transgender, by definition, implies a person whose gender identity does not align with the sex assigned to them at birth. As you can see, this definition does not include physical or medical sex reassignment anywhere. Okay? Which basically means that it's not necessary for a person to go through those procedures in order to identify as transgender. In fact, a lot of the trans or gender diverse individuals do not even feel the need to go through any medical or surgical procedures to feel or live as per the gender that they identify with. So, sex reassignment, not necessary. Okay. Now, as we have already touched upon the topic of pronouns, a lot of people feel very apprehensive and very queasy about asking people their pronouns. And they feel that, asking would be so much worse, so much more embarrassing. So let's just assume, okay, because we can obviously see what's going on there with the whole gender aspect, right? But that is not the best way to go about things, because the point is that usually when anybody assumes someone's gender, it is based on the externality of it. What can I see? How does this person express their gender? What are the clothes they wear? What does their voice sound like? How do they walk? Okay, do they put makeup? Do they not put makeup? Okay. And these assumptions, as I said, they're usually based in these factors. But now, what we need to understand and remember is that gender expression and gender identity do not always necessarily match, they do not always align. And this is the reason why assuming somebody's gender on the basis of what you see can be a very dangerous and offensive thing to do. So it's always better to just offer your own pronouns and name and then ask for the other person's name and pronouns. That is always the best way to go about it, because although you may think that you are so certain and it's so obvious what a person identifies as, it's never that simple, you know. Now, having said this, a lot of you must be thinking that, okay, so if I know somebody's name and I know their pronouns, then I know their gender identity, right? So name, pronouns, check, gender identity, check, right? Wrong. Okay. Using names and pronouns as indicators of gender identity is probably not the best thing to do. Now let's take a very recent example of this actor Elliot Page. Okay. For those of you that are not well versed or do not know about Elliot Page is a Hollywood actor who is a trans male and has undergone some amount of surgery to align his gender identity and his physical appearance. Now, Elliot Page has been working in Hollywood for a very long time and doing some really impressive work, but they were assigned female at birth. Okay, and they used to go by the name Ellen Page earlier. Now, if let's say we didn't have all this information available to us and we didn't have all these facts available on the internet, and one of us were just supposed to run into Elliot Page, and we would start up with the whole introduction process, and Elliot Page would tell us, oh, you know what, my name's Elliot Page and my pronouns are he, him, his. The logical deduction is that Elliot, masculine name, he, him, his, masculine pronouns. This is a cisgender man. Okay? But that is not true. Elliot Page is a trans male. But you wouldn't know that unless Elliot Page told you that. You know? So if you're going to be someone who makes these assumptions based on names and pronouns, then you're going to end up in a tight spot. To add to that, a lot of the non-binary and gender non-conforming individuals prefer to stick to their birth given names and the pronouns that have been associated with their assigned sex. And there are a lot of pop culture and recent examples available. Um, so, so basically, now you must be wondering that, like, okay, if even with names and pronouns I cannot tell anybody's gender identity, then what is the point? I'm stuck. You're not. Okay. The only place where you're gonna get stuck is if you're trying to figure out people's gender story from their names and their pronouns. The best way to go is work with what the individual gives you. If someone tells you their name and their pronouns are this, you just work with that. You don't have the burden to figure out their gender identity unless they tell it to you. Okay, so you will be fine if you're going to be working with just what the individual gives you. But if you're somebody who's trying to basically draw up an entire blueprint of where this person comes from and where they have been in terms of their gender, then you're probably going to screw up a bit. Now, now basically, now when it comes to misgendering, obviously one of the best ways to prevent it is offer your own pronouns and ask the other person's pronouns, right? So so some of you might be wondering, what about dead naming? How do we prevent that? You know, apart from now to answer that question, apart from committing yourself to actually make that change of adopting the individual's new name, one of the strategies that is being advocated for within the community, within the field, okay, is that of the use of gender neutral names. Now, this is tends to be a slightly futuristic strategy, because over here what we are talking about basically is we are talking about parents naming their kids with gender neutral names. Now, what are gender neutral names? They're basically names that are not necessarily gender specific, like names like Taylor. You have Taylor Swift, you have Taylor Lautner. It works both ways. Okay. You have Blake, you have Blake Shelton, you have Blake Lively. Works both ways. Even in India, you have names like Kiran, names like Krishna. Okay. These are gender neutral names. They work for both male as well as female people. But now, so as I said, this takes a very futuristic perspective, because basically it talks about parents naming their kids, bearing in mind that someday their kid might grow up to have a gender dysphoria issue, or they might want to, they might not be very comfortable with the sex that they have been assigned at birth. And this would basically save them the hassle of having to change everything from root level. Okay, so this is, since it is futuristic, it works from more of a preventative perspective. It takes it takes it works. It doesn't it's not a strategy that can be applied midway through, basically, is what I'm saying. But apart from that, what we can do is definitely commit ourselves to actually making the change actively, consciously. Okay. Now, now another thing that we need to look at is misgendering and dead naming is going to happen. Okay. At least for some time, it is going to be there. People are going to do this to you if you are someone who has changed your name or who is working on changing your pronouns. So if someone does this to you, how do you respond? How do you effectively uh, react or respond in these situations? Now, one of the things that you can do initially is work on correcting the person. Because even as a trans or a gender diverse individual, you need to understand that change takes time. Okay. And sometimes, even if someone is genuinely respecting you and wants to make that change, but if they have known you with a particular name or have referred to you with particular pronouns for years or for a very long time, it's going to take them some time to unlearn that and get accustomed to the new thing that you want them to work with. So you definitely need to acknowledge that time and effort and work on correcting the individual politely initially. But if you notice that it's becoming very rampant or it's becoming very repetitive, that this person keeps, just keeps messing it up all the time, like as if they're not even trying hard enough, then you need to be a little bit more assertive and firm that look, this is my name, these are my pronouns, I've told you this a few times. It would be really good if you could just respect that and try to work with that. Okay, it's very important to set up boundaries and limits in terms of how many times you're going to have that conversation also with particular people, like especially when this happens in your immediate environment. Like there are a lot of trans individuals who will say, like, my mom just refuses to address me this way, or or my neighbor, because I've grown up in this neighborhood, they'll be like, Arey, I have played with you since you were a baby and I have called you like this, I'm not changing this. You cannot sit around and just, I mean, you need to set some kind of boundaries that this is not fine. And I'm going to have this conversation only about so many times. After that, it's not working. Okay. And if someone refuses, outright refuses, that, you know what, you have been a man for me always, and you're going to be a man for me always. I don't care what you have to tell me about it. Okay. They just outright refuse to acknowledge. Then just remember that, especially if you have the chance to, you don't necessarily have to play along. You don't have to act like it's fine. Okay, this person doesn't want to acknowledge my identity. Okay, I'll just work with whatever they give me. No, because what a lot of gender diverse individuals forget is that to be respected is their right. Okay, you deserve to be respected. If someone is choosing not to, that just speaks volumes about themselves, not about the gender diverse individuals. Now, if we as people, okay, end up misgendering or dead naming somebody by mistake, then what do we do? How do we respond to that? First thing is you acknowledge it, okay? You make sure that you own up to the fact that you messed up. Then you apologize for having messed up. You correct yourself, okay, to whichever is the desired name or pronoun of the individual, and you move the hell on. What a lot of people do is they get stuck, like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, this is so wrong, I should have never done this, oh my god, you must be feeling so bad right now. Don't do that. You're just making it worse. Just say, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, I slipped up. Correct yourself, move on. Okay. Another thing that you're not supposed to do if you misgender or dead name somebody, don't make excuses, don't get defensive, and don't ask for credit. There are so many people who will be like, oh, but at least I'm trying. Like, cut me some slack, okay? These things take time. Or they'll be like, Are, but I didn't mean it. I didn't, I see it just slipped, then you're being defensive. You're trying to give up excuses. Don't do that. Just acknowledge that it happened, it was wrong, move on. Okay? Another thing is, don't elaborate and exaggerate to other people, because a lot of times when this happens, people are they are more than being concerned about how the individual who has just been misgendered or dead named by you will be feeling. They are more concentrated on their own feelings and their own reputation. So it's like, look, I support the community, okay? There's nothing like, it's not like I have anything against you. They'll go to other people and be like, I shit, yara, you know what I did this thing, it's so bad, I don't know. They'll never look at me the same again. Oh my god, everybody will be thinking I'm such a, prejudiced person and stuff. Don't do that. Because then it's like, if you're going and telling somebody else, like, even if that person didn't know that there was some dead naming or misgendering that occurred, now the entire world knows. And you've just, what have you done? You've made a small thing a huge issue. So don't do that either. And the next thing that you will do, that you should do, is make a genuine, conscious effort to rectify this mistake. Okay, you need to constantly remind yourself, okay, this is this person, this is the name, this is the pronoun, this is the name, this is the pronoun. Okay, because this is somebody's identity that we are talking about here. It's not and it's not up to you to decide their pronouns or their names for them. Yeah, so you need to make that effort. Now another thing, now this is speaking on a very individual level, but now as a society, as a nation, as 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 a collective unit, what can we do to actually avoid and do away with this entire practice of misgendering or dead naming? Now, how I see it, the main goal is to create an inclusive environment. Okay, and one of the things that we should be focusing on is gaining more information about the trans community and gender diverse individuals. We need to educate people about what are the struggles and the problems that this community goes through on a daily basis. Because I believe when people are more sensitive to the problems of this community and they know what they genuinely go through, they will be in a better place to decide for themselves, the positive and the negative impacts of their behavior on this community and its members. Another thing that we need to remember is that people are inherently intimidated by things that they don't understand. So we need to work on sensitization programs like the one that we are having right now. Also, these kind of programs need to be held in schools, workplaces, and wherever else possible. We need to work on making our language more inclusive, adopt more inclusive practices, like as we discussed, asking people their pronouns in terms of workplaces and all, having gender inclusive forms, wherever possible. Maybe if you are in a position of power, have gender neutral washrooms. Because I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to making the effort to find out how we as individuals can do least harm to another human, right? Because beneath gender, name, identity, all of these things, it's just human to human, right? So I think this is basically the main things that we need to do. And yes, I think for now, that is it. Those are basically all of my talking points for the day. Francis, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Farheen, for throwing light on this like very pressing topic, a very sensitive topic, but which is still very important also in today's day, since we are understanding that gender is not just confined to just two boxes or three boxes for that matter in certain cases, but it's an entire spectrum of identities, and also you cannot uh, you cannot base anything just on one's appearance. And also thank you for enforcing that idea that um, respect is important. We need to respect each person's perception of themselves and their own identity, because after all we are all unique in our own way. So now we will move on to the Q&A. I'm not sure if we have any questions yet, but if anyone would like to even you know unmute yourselves, and if you're comfortable with that, you can like do so. You can ask any questions that you may have regarding the topic.
So I had one question. Sometimes while like in when I'm deep in conversation, I have forgotten the pronouns that people have preferred for themselves, and inadvertently I have addressed them with the pronouns that they were assigned. I mean, the pronouns that they don't no longer identify with. So and it takes a minute to realize that you've done something, uh, unless the person in question interrupts you and corrects you. Sometimes I don't even realize that I have done that. So how do we be mindful of not falling into the this kind of a trap, or this kind of a mentality where we revert to using uh, not dead naming, but just miss using the wrong pronouns.
Right. So, um, your question is, how are you supposed to be more mindful about these things, or how do you respond regarding this within the situation?
Yes, it's
What is
actually both. It's actually both.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a very good question actually that you have asked, and thank you for bringing it up.
Hmm.
So first thing, in terms of responding, I believe that once you realize that you have made a mistake, okay, the best thing to do is, because sometimes, as I said, doing it in a public space or doing it around everybody, it can get weird, especially as you're
Yeah.
saying, if the time has passed.
Hmm.
Okay, if it is like it's been a minute or two or 5 minutes, and then you've realized that, oh god, I have done this.
Yeah.
Okay, the
Yeah.
best thing is, find the person, tell them, I realize I messed up, I'm
Yeah.
gonna try harder.
Hmm.
Okay, and
Hmm.
I'm gonna try and make sure that this never happens again. As I
Okay.
said, acknowledge,
Hmm.
apologize, correct yourself, and move on.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Second thing is that if you do realize quickly enough,
Hmm.
okay,
Hmm.
and let's say you have misgendered the person in a public setting,
Hmm.
you own up. When you're
Yeah.
owning up, let's say it's like a group conversation in, let's say, a party,
Hmm.
and let's say after within a few seconds even, you realize that you messed up. Then you acknowledge it right there, because you messed up publicly. You tell them within that, this thing, that I did this wrong, yeah.
Yeah.
So you find the person basically and speak to them one on one. Again,
Hmm.
as I said, do not go around and tell other people, oh, I did this, now
Right.
I don't know how to react.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
In terms of being more mindful about it,
Hmm.
um, this is something that it will go on a very personal and individual level.
Yeah.
Okay, you will have to put in a lot of conscious efforts yourself from your
Hmm.
own side, to
Hmm.
constantly remind yourself that I know this is a person within my circle,
Hmm.
this is the name that they go by,
Hmm.
these are the pronouns that they go by.
Yeah.
Okay, the
Yeah.
reason why this thing of reverting back to the assigned gender usually happens is because we are conditioned that way, to just work with what society has constantly like just assigned to this person. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you need to kind of work on doing sort of that mental or paradigm shift wherein you give more importance to what the individual tells you. So
Right.
let's say person A has told you that my name
Mm.
is A and my pronouns are he, him, his.
Mm-hmm.
You need to give that more importance than the fact that you
Mm.
know that
Mm.
person A was called B earlier
Mm.
and their pronouns used to be her, she, hers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to kind of, obviously it'll take a lot of personal effort, as I said,
Yeah.
but I think if you can make it a better place for this person, then it's worth a shot, right?
Right. Right.
So, so yeah, basically, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
in terms of responding, yes, one to one is basically what is encouraged.
Mm.
You go find the person,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
acknowledge and
Mm-hmm.
apologize, and move on.
Mm.
That is the
Yeah.
main thing.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Thanks.
welcome.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah. Amanda
I
has
think
asked a
there is
question.
something in the chat box. There are times that I don't use the proper pronoun because I don't want relatives of the queer individual to be defensive. We just want to avoid that argument, like why you saying this and why not that. I don't know if it's okay or I should be more assertive. Um, so you're saying that you use the you are not using the proper pronoun for uh, another queer person because you don't want their family to get defensive. Is it correct? Am I understanding the question right? Am I understanding the situation correctly? I mean,
I think
okay, so okay, so I think the best thing over here again would be to check in on the queer person itself. Okay, what is it that they would like you to do? There are some queer individuals who would prefer you to not use the actual pronoun with which they go by and just function with the assigned pronoun because it would help avoid these kind of uncomfortable situations and arguments and defensiveness. But there are a lot of queer people who will take offense that, like, especially if you know the queer person and then you know their family. You get what I'm saying? Then it's like, I have already told you this. Now, because my family is in the picture, you completely throw my identity out the window and you expect me to be fine with this. So, in this case, again, it will be in terms of this individual. You will have to check with the individual actually in these cases, usually. Does that answer your question? If you are completely if you are completely aware of the fact that the individual has publicly uses these pronouns and that's how they want to be addressed, then you would have to be, I think, so lean on to the assertiveness part of it. That look, if the family even asks you that, why are you using this pronoun and whatever, this is not my kid, then you directly tell them, I understand that you know your kid through a certain way, but I know your kid with this name and this pronoun, and this is what they have asked me to call them, and I'm going to stick with that. Okay? Does that make sense? All right.
does anyone else want to ask any questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Okay, we've got one more.
I've got a high pitched voice, euphonia, and many a times while speaking on the phone, they think it's a woman speaking. And now I've got haters who keep calling me names. How should I deal with such situations? In this case, when you say I've got haters who keep calling me names, are you saying like in real time, or these are like people who call you up and disturb you, or like what exactly are we dealing with here?
I think what they are referring to
Uh,
is, I guess, friends bullying or something.
I
Like
think so,
whenever
yeah.
they talk to them on the over the phone.
Yeah, probably. Uh-huh. Okay. So basically, the first thing, again, I will tell you, work on the assertiveness part and setting your boundaries. Okay. If that is not you, you don't identify that way, and that is those are not your names or whatever, you need to be clear and assertive and tell them that look, this is not working. This is not who I am. You need to stop. Okay. Beyond that point, if they continue, and most likely if they are bullies, they are going to continue. Okay, if you can eject yourself from those situations, as I said, no need to play along, then please do that. If it gets really, if it goes really far, like how you're saying, while I'm riding on my bike to work, some random people keep calling you names. Okay, if you feel like in a way it is kind of affecting your safety in a way, because while you're riding and all, if people are taking the time to actually make your life more miserable, frankly speaking, okay, then you might want to look into some more solid options. Maybe tell them that this can have consequences, because this, I mean, there are authorities and stuff, I'm to deal with these kind of like, because this goes as complete harassment. If it is as bad as you are saying, so you can actually, there can be consequences if you push for it. So you can always don't, I mean, you need to be confident and assertive and just tell them that this is not working, and I'm going to take the necessary action if need be. As I said, setting your boundaries and limits, it's very important when it comes to such things. Yeah. And apart from that, if you feel that that's not working out, I mean, if you feel that you just don't want to continue with this people or whatever, you can try and eject yourself from the situation wherever possible, of course. Okay. George, has your question been answered before I take on the other question? Okay. Okay. So Ivan is asked, when a queer individual isn't around and another person hanging out with me has used the dead name or wrong pronoun, how do you assert enough that doing the same is unethical? In this case, I would suggest, first of all, call them out politely. Okay, tell them, you do realize, right? You've done this. This is not the name, or this is not the pronoun that the person uses anymore. So just call them out on that. If they accept and they correct it and they move on, I think the conversation basically ends there. Okay, if the person is like, oh, but okay, forget, anyhow this person is not even here, or something like that, then you might have to be a little bit more assertive and just tell them that, oh, it doesn't matter if the person is not here, you're using the wrong name and the wrong pronoun. That's just wrong, because you're not referring to the same person. Then it's as good as not referring to the same person. Yeah, so you need to tell this person that this is this is not right. And also, if you notice, because there are some people who will, they will acknowledge and correct themselves, But as I said, even during my talking points, they tend to do it rampantly. The misgendering and the dead naming is happening rampantly. And let's say you are from the circle and you have realized that this person tends to do this very often. You might want to call them out on that also and be like, I've actually noticed that you do this quite often, yeah. It's really not that hard to make the change. At least try, so depending on your obviously your rapport and what your equation with this individual is, the stance, the tone, all those things will change, but more or less this is basically how you would you know call them out. Yeah. And if it is happening publicly also, another thing is if it's happening in a group or publicly that this one person has misgendered or dead named, you might want to take them aside and tell them, I noticed this about you, don't do it. Yeah. So that's another thing. Uh, is does that make sense? Are you satisfied? I mean, is the question answered, Ivan? Okay. Are there any more questions or anything that you want to ask about?
Yeah, actually, Sherry is trying to ask a question. Yeah, okay, yeah, there, it's come.
Okay. I'd like to know if there are any transgender people here willing to share their experiences with regards to this, either when they have been addressed correctly or incorrectly. Perhaps there may be some things not touched on in what has been covered. Sure, yeah, actually, this makes a lot of sense. Yes, if there are any trans or gender diverse people here, please share your whatever you're comfortable with sharing, of course. All right. Thanks, Amanda, for joining in.
Okay, hi Sherry. I'm Chris, Christine by birth. Okay, but as everybody knows of late, it's Chris, what I identify myself as because I'm a trans man, although I'm not going to be doing my HRT. But and people also like people who know me, basically they also call me if they when they use the pronouns, it's he, him. So yeah, but when it's a tough journey because like how Farheen's also said, it takes a lot of guts to approach your family itself to make them call you a he or call me Chris instead of Christine because my traits are of a guy. I don't need to do my surgery basically, but I would prefer being called a guy as in a trans man than oh that's her because it till date I struggle with this thing with my mom more than anybody else when she speaking to somebody and she says she has done and I just turn for it's like a split second your brain is like and then you just let it go because I've tried drilling it into her but at a certain time frame like Farheen said you kind of give up because of the age difference. My mom's almost 70, so you can't. you can't teach her that now because she's got me from the day I was born, right? So it's a, I can, it's like I can break my head onto the wall and still it won't change. Okay, today's day, sometimes she calls me Chris, but one day I had a conflict with her saying that why can't you call me a him? Yeah, how can I do that? I know you as a girl from the day you were born. How can I call you a he when you're physically a she? So I'm like, that's it. Like, you can't, I don't want to break that link with her because there's no point. It's like there are certain things they are just not willing to get, mostly if it's the older generation. But the younger generation, like my cousins and all, they've already got it. They, once in a blue moon, they'll slip up, but then they say, oh, sorry, sorry. And it's like once in a blue moon because they've also known me from a young kid, right? But yeah, that's about it. So our younger generation, basically, they get it better than the older generation because to explain to the older generation, it's a long, it's time, and they won't. They will, mostly our parents or our aunties and uncles who are like almost 70s and 80s. No way, they won't. That's what I feel, according to me, because it takes a long, long time to make them even say Chris. The Chris has happened, but the he and he, him, till date, no. And I've been struggling from this from 2013. So it's still a long process. Yeah, that's it, Sherry.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. And I think we can wrap up now. And so I would like to first of all thank Farheen for taking time out of a busy schedule, keeping her counseling sessions aside and, making time for this webinar to prepare for this webinar too. So thank you so much, Farheen. It was really a pleasure and it was really insightful. And I hope that the audience could take a substantial amount of information, to help them not misgender and not dead name individuals and, instead respect everyone for who they are. And I would also like to thank all of you for joining for today's webinar. Without you guys, it would not be possible. So thank you so much. We will be emailing all of you a feedback form so that it can help us understand where we can improve in future webinars or future events that we do organize. And with that, I would like to say thank you again and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis and Chris for having me today. And thank you all the participants for joining in and for giving your suggestions, your questions. And Chris, thank you for sharing your experience with us all.
It was my pleasure. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Have a nice night.
Yeah, thanks again.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.